All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing along the path of the Final Fantasy classes by looking at the Black Mage. First things first, reminder, if you enjoy the things that I do, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon and turn notifications on. All those things are really important, not only to this video being seen, but to this channel growing. After the lovely William SRD has been kind enough to kind of show me off in one of his videos, I'm actually interested in growing this channel. And in order to do that, I need some of you guys to share these videos around. So, yes, please do that. So, the Black Mage. First things first, I'm going to tell you right at the beginning here, we just passed a minute. Black Mage doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. In no world would I allow this to be played at my table. It is broken. As I've mentioned before, I do not have the creative energy to be able to redesign any more classes. I will have a suggestion about where I think it would make sense for the Black Mage to go if it were to have a redesign done. But that's what I'm going to do. Going to say right now. The other thing, because the Black Mage is effectively a wizard with a bunch of extra stuff, there's not a lot to talk about with the Black Mage as it's written. So I'm going to cover not only the Black Mage, but all the subclasses in this one video, just to kind of get it out of the way, so I can move on to something that I think I might have some good feedback on, other than, you know, fix it. So that being said, let's talk about the Black Mage in Final Fantasy. Black Mage is one of the jobs that in the original Final Fantasy there were 6 jobs. They were fighter, thief, monk, or I think it was either monk or black belt. But anyway, it's monk basically. Black Mage, White Mage, and Red Mage. And thus did the finalist of fantasies start. And Black Mage has been, since the first one, all the way through till effectively until they stop using classes, because Final Fantasy 15 didn't really have classes. But in 14, it's the damage dealer of damage dealers. In every single Final Fantasy where you have a Black Mage character, they just do crazy amounts of damage. That's what they do. They have access to the most powerful spells, which, depending on which Final Fantasy you're talking about, is either Flare or Ultima, are generally the 2 most powerful spells. And they're generally something that's exclusive to the Black Mage. Lore-wise, going all the way back, Black Mages were the offensive spellcasters. White Mages were the defensive spellcasters. And then Red Mages were the kind of jack-of-all-trades, master of none, where they could do offensive casting, they could do defensive casting, they could also use swords and shield and wear some armor. So they were designed to do a little bit of everything. Actually, remarkably similar to the elf class in original D&D, way back when D&D was first a thing. Hobbits and elves were classes, not races. And elves were a combination fighter and wizard, effectively. Later on, you would get to in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you would get the ability to multi-class if you were a non-human race, and you could. One of the multi-classes that was very, very popular was the Fighter Mage. Another one was the Thief Mage. But anyway, so that's more Red Mage. But Black Mage has just always been the powerhouse. Now, one of the things, whenever you had a Black Mage in your party, one of the things you had to do was really, really focus on elemental weaknesses and resistances, because that's where the Black Mage shined. Um, Generally, what you would do if you had a Black Mage in your party, you would have someone in the party, either the White Mage or somebody else that would have this ability. In Final Fantasy V, my personal favorite, the Blue Mage is actually remarkably good at this because they had an ability that would let you just scan people. But what you would do is you would cast the scan spell or the identify spell. There's a billion different names for it. But what it would do is it would tell you what the weakness of the monster was, and then your Black Mage would just cast their highest level spell of that. And in early Final Fantasy, that meant Fire 1, 2, 3, Lit 1, 2, 3, which eventually turned to Bolt 1, 2, 3, and eventually had a 4 as well. And now they are Fire, Ice, and Thunder are your 3 elemental spells. And then as they get higher up, you get Fyra, Icera, Thundara, Fyraga, Blizzagra. Oh yeah, it's not Ice, it's Blizzard. So Blizzara, and then Blizzaga, and then Thundaga. And then the 4th level, if they do have it in the game, would be Fyraja, Blizzaja, with a J, and then Thundaja. So yeah, that's how the Black Mage has always been. It's always been a really kind of simple class to run. When you were not fighting bosses, if you were smart, you would cast your low-level spells so that they still did decent enough to damage. Because your high-level spells could kill everything, but you would completely demolish your magic points super quickly. And ethers were hard to get in earlier Final Fantasies, and still aren't super easy to get in later ones. So you'd cast your low-level spells as you went on, and then, as you got higher up, you'd start using mid-level spells and things like that. That was really all you did. So it was a pretty simple class to run. It was absolutely devastating. The only real downside to it is Black Mages do not have armor. They don't wear armor. They wear robes, and even when you put them in the back, they get killed really, really easily. So they were a kind of give and take. They were a glass cannon type of class. And they have always been there. From the first game, I do not believe there is a single game that has a class-based system or has characters that kind of adhere to a class. Like Final Fantasy VI didn't have a class system, but they had characters that kind of adhered to classes. And I'm drawing a blank on Final Fantasy VI right now, but I know there was at least 1 or 2 different Black Mages in Final Fantasy VI. Yeah, it just goes on from there. So adapting such an iconic class into D&D is going to be difficult, especially since the thing that makes the Black Mage special in most Final Fantasies is it is the offensive magic user. Well, in D&D, literally every class can be an offensive magic user if you take the right feats. And a lot of subclasses for non-spellcasting classes have aspects that will add magic to them. The Eldritch Knight for the fighter, the Arcane Trickster for the rogue, even the Way of the Four Elements monk adds some spellcasting in, even though it does it really poorly. It's remarkably difficult to find a class that doesn't have some kind of spellcasting subclass for it. I think Barbarian is the only one that doesn't technically have a spellcasting subclass. And with Tasha's, they added a wild magic subclass for the Barbarian. So even the Barbarian, the big stupid guy with the big old, I hit things with sharp, can do magic kind of stuff in the D&D 5th edition. So finding a place for a character that their only kind of unique feature is I cast magic is going to be difficult no matter what. Now, the Final Fantasy XIV Black Mage is a little bit more special than just, I cast offensive magic, because, spoiler alert, white mages have offensive magic spells. Every single class in the game has offensive abilities. They'd have to, or you wouldn't be able to level the class. So In Final Fantasy XIV, the defining features of the Black Mage are not, oh, it casts offensive magic. The two things that kind of make the Black Mage unique in Final Fantasy XIV are Ley Lines and Fire and Ice spells. I personally do not have a Black Mage leveled. I have not tried it at all. However, Yoshi P, for those of you that may not be aware, if you're watching this stuff from a D&D perspective and not a Final Fantasy XIV perspective, you may not know who Yoshi P is. Yoshi P is the director of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, one of the things that makes Final Fantasy XIV unique as far as any other MMO I am aware of is all the people that work on Final Fantasy XIV play Final Fantasy XIV. And they play test their own content. There's no public test servers. There are no beta tests for Final Fantasy XIV. It's all done in-house because everybody that develops it plays the game. And Yoshi P mains Black Mage. So anyone that plays Final Fantasy XIV and has for a while has a respect for the Black Mage because that is the creator's chosen class. And so that's another thing that does make this class really, really special if you're going to be adapting it to 5th edition. This is Yoshi P's class. If Yoshi P was to decide to pick up a D20 and decide to use this, he's going to be looking at the Black Mage first. So you better get this one right. It's another reason why I just said, you know what, it's broken. But the two things that define the Black Mage in Final Fantasy XIV. Ley Lines is remarkably kind of simple, and it's one of the things that kind of gets Black Mages picked on a little bit. Ley Lines, basically what happens is you can set down these Ley Lines, which is just this big old symbol on the ground. And while you stand in the Ley Lines, you get all these buffs, and you do a lot more damage, but you can't move out of your Ley Lines or you lose it. And the Ley Lines, you don't get to just move them. I mean, there's other things that happen as you level up. But basically, the point of Ley Lines is you park your Black Mage down, and they just sit there casting over and over and over again, and they can't move. And one of the tricks to playing Black Mage is knowing when you can put your Ley Lines down and when you can't, and knowing where to put your Ley Lines. Because in boss battles, one of the things I like about Final Fantasy XIV is you are constantly moving. I've been playing Endwalker this weekend. The boss battles are incredible, but they're the most complex boss battles I have done thus far. They're not difficult or anything like that, but they have learned how to craft these really interesting, fun boss battles. And so you are constantly moving all the time. So the trick to playing a Black Mage is knowing you have to know the boss battles generally better than almost any other class. Because while the other classes can move around and kind of learn as they're going, the Black Mage, as soon as you put those Ley Lines down, you are stuck there until you're ready to cast it again so you can move to another place. And if you put your Ley Lines down and then immediately have to move, you've just wasted your most powerful buff ability. And yeah, so that's one of the things. The other things that Black Mage do, and this is right from level 1. Ley Lines you don't get until you're higher level. But right from level 1, or maybe it's not. I'm actually not sure. It's something you get relatively early. Again, I haven't played Black Mage. But you have two different kinds of spells. You have fire spells and you have ice spells. Now, again, in earlier versions of Final Fantasy, most creatures had weaknesses and resistances. So you couldn't just cast fire spells on every single creature, because some creatures it would do less damage, some creatures would do more, some creatures it would actually heal them. So you're constantly picking the spell that's going to work best for you. In Final Fantasy XIV, it doesn't work that way. They couldn't do elemental resistances because not every class gets access to elemental anythings. What they did was monsters in Final Fantasy 14 don't have weaknesses and resistances to elements or anything like that, because that would create some really really big problems. Just ask just ask old WoW players how much fun Molten Core was, and having to get a full set of fire resist armor before you were even allowed to try it. That is old school WoW stuff. So, what they have for the Black Mage, and again, this was one of the problems with playing a Black Mage, is most of your powerful abilities are linked to your magic points. Once you're out of magic points, you're bopping people with rods, which does no damage. It was really, really boring. Either you're bopping people with rods, or the other weapon that Black Mages could use was a dagger. But neither of them did any kind of real damage, especially since you left your Black Mages in the back row, so they didn't die instantly. And from the black row, you would do half damage with rods and daggers, so they were just useless without magic points. So they came up with an interesting way to fix that in Final Fantasy XIV. In Final Fantasy XIV, when you cast fire spells, you burn your magic points down. When you cast ice spells, you earn your magic points back, and they actually have a gauge that goes as you go to as you cast more fire spells, you get further and further into fire. Which gives you benefits for casting ice spells the further into fire you are. And then when you cast ice spells, you go further and further into ice. And so the whole mechanic behind playing a Black Mage outside of your Ley Lines is you have to burn all your spell points down using fire spells and build up your fire side. And then you switch over to ice spells and get all your magic back as you do all your ice spells. And it's a really interesting mechanic. Eventually I want to play all the classes. I want to get them all to what used to be 80. Now it's going to be 90. I want to get them all to 90 because I think that would be super, super cool. And there's a special mount that you get if you get all the classes to 80 that I really want. And I will guarantee there's something cool that you get if you get them all down to 90. I don't know what it is, but I want them. So that's how the Black Mage works in Final Fantasy XIV, in a nutshell. Again, I don't play the class, so I don't know it super, super well. But I know some of what it is, because that's Yoshi P's class. How did they attempt to translate it and fail? Again, I've told you already, this doesn't work. I would never allow this to be played at my table, because it's massively broken. Well, let's find out. So, first things first, class features, your basic stuff. Hit die is a D6. D6 is really, really low. I have to really quick check here, because I thought I may be 100% wrong on this, because, again, it's been a long time. Give me wizard. Again, this is basically a wizard. Wizard. They do a D6. Okay. In earlier editions of the D&D, wizards had a D4 hit die. And low-level wizards, if monsters blinked at them, they died. They were just super, super squishy, so they're always in the back. They only had like 1 or 2 spells at level 1, so it was literally, they would stand in the back, they would cast their 1 spell, and then they would use a sling, it's how I played them. That's all they would do, is they would just do 1 or 2 points of damage from the very back, and it wasn't until around level 5 where they would go from, I cast my 1 spell, now I do nothing, to, I will set you all ablaze. So yeah. You get a D6 hit die, no armor proficiencies, weapon proficiencies, daggers, darts, slings, quarterstaffs, maces, light crossbows. One of the few classes that don't get proficiency in all simple weapons. Tools, none. Saving throws, intelligence, and wisdom. Makes perfect sense. Skills, choose 2 from Arcana, Deception, History, Insight, Intimidation, Persuasion, and Religion. And then equipment, you start with a dagger, a spellcasting focus, an explorer's pack, or a scholar's pack, and a spellbook. That's it. It's pretty simple, pretty easy. This is most definitely a SAD class, a single attribute dependent class. You just need intelligence. There's nothing else in the entire class that you will ever use anything but intelligence. So Yes, you will max that very, very quickly, and then you'll probably take feats because there's no reason to raise any other attribute scores at all. All you do as a Black Mage is you cast spells. And we'll find out exactly why in just a second here. So yeah, that's the class features. Starting at level 1, you get 2 different things. First thing you get is spellcasting. It's wizard spellcasting. It's almost word for word. I think possibly the only difference, and I cannot believe I closed out of the wizard page before I looked at this because I have to remember. No, it is literally like almost word for word. This is the wizard spellcasting ability, which makes sense because if I was to just have someone try to translate their Final Fantasy XIV character into D&D, I would have them play a wizard. I'd probably have them play an evocation wizard. So it makes perfect sense that you literally have the exact same spellcasting as the wizard. You use intelligence, you get a spell book, you start with the same number of spells, you get the same number of spells in your spell book. Like it's a wizard. It's literally just the wizard. The second thing you get at first level is called Mana Font. And this is where it immediately breaks the game. Mana points. You have 1 mana point, and you gain more as you reach higher levels, as shown in the mana points column of the Black Mage to table. You can never have more mana points than shown on the table for your level. You gain all spent mana points and you finish a long rest. Ley Lines. Remember I mentioned Ley Lines? Here's where Ley Lines should show up. When you cast a spell, the residual mana from your spell temporarily creates a ley line, which can be manipulated with your mana font. If you cast a spell last turn and then have not moved or taken any other actions during your turn, you may spend a number of mana points equal to that spell's level to cast an evocation spell equal to or lower than that level without expending a spell slot. Your turn immediately ends after casting the spell. You can cast spells in this way no higher. In this way, no higher in level than 5th. So they added a magic point system, and now you effectively get double the number of spell slots of any other class. Yep. You wonder why it's broken? That's why it's broken. Wizards have the ability to regain some spell slots, but even at max level, it's not many. This instantly, right at first level, you now have an additional first level spell. So you have 2 first level spell slots at first level for any spellcasting class. Except for this one, you have 3 first level spell slots. And the higher up you go, the more unbalanced it gets. For 5th level spells, you never get more than 3 spell slots. You don't get 3 5th level spell slots until 18th level. Because 5th level spells only cost you 5 mana points, at 10th level, when you get your second 5th level slot, you effectively have 4 5th level slots. You are more powerful than any other spellcaster in the game the entire time. That's why I said this is broken right from level 1. By giving them both, here's a term you may not be familiar with, Venetian Spellcasting. I believe it's what it's called. Before I say 100%, yeah. No, Vancian, not Venetian. Vancian. Vancian. Wow, I got that totally wrong. I always pronounce it Venetian in my brain. I don't know why. It's spelled Vancian. Anyway, Vancian magic system is the system actually that Final Fantasy started with in Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3. I think 4 was when they first started using magic points. But the NES Final Fantasies all use the Vancian magic system, which is you have spell slots, and then you can cast spells of that level using those slots. Now, that's how D&D has been since its inception, and it's always been that way. It has always used the Vancian magic system. Black Mage, as it's written here, uses both the Venetian magic system and the spell point system, which is a completely different system where instead of having spell slots, what you have effectively is you have a pool of spell points, and then you have spells, and each spell will cost a certain number of those spell points. It is significantly more customizable, and it changes things drastically because in the Venetian magic system, you will always have first level spell slots, and you can't use a first level spell slot to cast a second level spell, or you can't turn lower level spell slots into higher level spell slots unless you are a sorcerer, and that's kind of the big deal about being a sorcerer is you can trade spell slots. That's a big deal. With this, they get the best of both worlds. They get their mana points and they get their Venetian magic system, which again just means that they get to cast more spells than any other class. Now, the limiting factor is they basically have to cast a spell, and then in their next turn, they get to cast a spell and do nothing else. They get no bonus actions. They don't get to use their bonus action. They don't get to use their movement. And they also can't use their reaction in between casting the spell and then using Ley Lines to cast another spell. So it is a relatively limiting thing where you basically have to use your full turn. In 3rd edition, they actually had these actions you could take called full turn actions, which would use both your movement and your action to do it, and it would immediately end your turn. That's effectively what Ley Lines is it's a full turn action. However, anyone that's played a wizard, there's a lot of times when you literally just stand in a corner and cast spells. You don't really need to move that much. And with the way that Ley Lines works, basically every other turn you can reposition and then just cast 2 of your most powerful spells back to back. Now, it does limit you at no higher than 5th level. So it's not as broken as it could be. If it didn't limit that, then you literally could just wipe the floor with everything because you could back-to-back cast 9th level spells, and 9th level spells break reality. In D&D, they are literally, they break reality. Wish is a 9th level spell, and it rewrites existence. So is it as broken as it can be? No. Is it still massively broken? Yes. You cannot give a class, like literally if your explanation for your subclass is, well, it's a wizard with extra stuff, it's broken. If you're already giving them all the abilities of the wizard and then giving them more things, it's broken already. And again, the wizard itself, there's not a lot to it. Like literally, you have arcane recovery. You have your spellcasting, you have arcane recovery, you pick your tradition as 2nd level, then you don't get another thing until 18th level, which is spell mastery, and then 20th level is signature spell. That's all you got for the wizard. It is a remarkably straightforward class. You kill things with spells. Literally, the only thing this class is missing is spell mastery and signature spell, both of which are basically given to you with Ley Lines, but at significantly lower levels, and Ley Lines is significantly more useful than either spell mastery or signature spell. Literally, the only thing they don't have is arcane tradition, and resonating 8th or the 20th level ability basically takes care of that as well. So this is a wizard with extra stuff. If you thought wizards were not powerful enough, this is your class. However, wizards are one of the most overpowered class in every D&D edition ever. 4th edition, the entire reason 4th edition exists is they tried to fix the problem with, the saying goes, fighters increase linearly, spellcasters increase, or wizards increase exponentially. They start off really useless, and then whoop, they become so much more powerful than fighters that a 20th level fighter can hold their own against some powerful things. A 20th level wizard can one-shot in earlier editions can one-on-one demon lords. Like, that is how powerful 20th level spellcasters are. So, yes, the idea that, well, the wizard's not powerful enough, let's give them double the number of spells, isn't something that should ever be entertained. It's just not. So that's why I say this class is completely broken. Right at first level, mana font, mana points, ley lines, breaks the class completely. Moving on. At second level, you get magical discipline. It's your subclass. We'll talk about the subclasses in a second here, but they are Makai, Enchanter, and Void Mage. We'll talk about it in a second. Next, you get ability score improvement. We know how those work. At 18th level, you get Surecaster. Beginning at 18th level, as a bonus action, you may expend 5 mana points to achieve an impregnable state of mind. You pass all concentration checks automatically for the next 10 minutes. You are impervious to concentration breaking. All concentration checks you pass. As much as that sounds really, really useful, to be blunt, at 18th level, there are other ways that you can achieve passing most of your concentration checks. Like 9 times out of 10, at 18th level, if you're going to lose concentration on a spell, I mean, yeah, it's possible that you could lose it, but based on doing damage. More often than not, you're going to lose it based on something else. Getting stunned, getting incapacitated in some way, or I guess, yeah, getting hit by a really, really powerful attack would do that too. So, I mean, it's not bad, but being able to pass all concentration checks is never going to be as useful as casting a 5th level spell. Ever. Like, it's not. So, Surecaster, while it is kind of interesting, it's completely pointless because it's always going to be in your best interest to cast 5th level spells. Always. Always, always, always. Always, always. Always, always. Always. Always, always. Always, always. Always. 5th level spells are better than concentration checks. They just are. 20th level, beginning at 20th level, you gain half your missing mana points when you roll initiative. I'm going to explain something. Most combats last between about 4 to 6 rounds. The maximum number of mana points you can spend in a single go is 5. You can only do that every other turn. So in 4 rounds, you can only spend 5 mana or 10 mana points total. At 20th level, every time you roll initiative, you get 10 mana points. Do you see the problem? There's no possible way you will ever run out of mana points. Now, it's not just you have more spells than everyone. You never run out of spells. The only limiting factor is you have to cast a spell first. But due to the fact that you have 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells at this point, you will always be casting 5th level spells. It's just how it is. With Resonating Aether, you've turned a limited resource into an unlimited resource, and you didn't need it already. Now, I do want to point out, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, they do have a spell point system. They have a variant called spell points, and it's actually a really interesting system that I think if you wanted the Black Mage to really be different, having them use spell points instead of the traditional Venetian casting system could be really interesting and could be a lot of fun. And you wouldn't need to build anything because the big issue with spell points versus spell levels in 5th edition is you can cast spells at higher levels. And so being able to upcast spells and then having to assign spell point values to everything, it gets really, really confusing. The variant system in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which again has been out, it was, I believe, the 3rd book that released for Final Fantasy, or not for D&D 5th edition. It is one of the original 3 core rule books. Every Dungeon Master should have the Dungeon Master's Guide. even if you don't use 90% of it, you really should have it just because it's useful. There's lots of stuff in there. There's magic items in there for Pete's sake, which is what most people use. The Dungeon Master Guide is they use it for their magic items. Okay, but it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's a spell points variant, and it deals with how to upcast spells and how to deal with high level spells and just the flexibility that spell points gives you. It's a really well designed system. If you want to use a mana point style system for the Black Mage, use the one that already exists. This is something that I mention fairly often when I'm talking to other people about building classes, and I think I've mentioned it in this every so often. If you are building a custom subclass, a custom class, there are tools already in 5th edition that will help you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do something, especially if you're making a subclass. You really don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are systems already in place, and looking at things like Tasha's and the Dungeon Master's Guide, where they have variants in there, use those to build classes. They're really well designed. That's why they made it into these books. So yeah, that's the other thing that's kind of upsetting about this is they tried to reinvent something that already exists and has a better version that already exists in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And for me to figure out where it was, all I had to do is I put Magic Points D&D 5e into Google, and the second thing that came up is the thing that points me to the exact place to find it. It says in D&D's 5e, in D&D 5e's Dungeon Master Guide, 2014, page 288 to 289, characters begin with force. It tells you the exact page to find it. So this is not something that is mysteries that only the most amazing. This is something that has existed since 5th edition came out, or shortly after it came out, because the Player's Handbook came out in the summer. I think the Dungeon Master's Guide came out in the winter. So a few months after 5th edition officially launched. And it has been there the entire time. The system itself works really, really well. I do not understand why there was any need to go, I'm going to come up with my own system for this, and it's really, really broken. And I'm going to just give them this other spellcasting system in conjunction with this. So yeah, that is the Black Mage. I'll go through these subclasses in just a second here, but I want to talk about, again, I hate just giving feedback of, hey, this sucks. I don't find that to be particularly useful, and I don't personally enjoy giving that information. I know that's kind of how YouTube and the internet works now, is you just crap on stuff that you don't like, but I don't think that's very good. So I do have an idea that I think would work really, really well with the Black Mage, and it would actually fit the Final Fantasy XIV Black Mage a lot better than this. This, I don't feel like feels like playing your Final Fantasy XIV character in D&D. And again, that's what this should do. Excuse me for just a second. Much better. That's what this entire thing should be. Is it should be, if you have a D&D, or if you have a Final Fantasy XIV character, you go, you know what would be really fun is if I could play it on a tabletop. As part of a tabletop RPG. That's what this should do. It should allow you to take your character and create something that feels similar to what you have in Final Fantasy XIV. Obviously, it can't be a 1-to-1 ratio because they're different things. They're different mediums. They can't be the same thing. And this, it doesn't feel like you're playing a Black Mage from Final Fantasy XIV. It feels like you're playing something that you would find in the D&D wiki. Which, if you're unaware, if you ever want to find massively broken optional features and homebrew content, go to the D&D wiki. That is where people go, where they know to publish things where they know anywhere else they would be laughed out because it is absurdly broken and poorly designed stuff. That's the D&D wiki. This is something I could totally see being on the D&D wiki. And again, it doesn't feel like a Black Mage to me. What I think would be interesting for it is to lean into the fire and ice spells. Now, again, in 5th edition D&D, I've mentioned this before, resistances play a big part in the game. Weaknesses, not so much, or vulnerabilities, not so much in 5th edition. There's not enough creatures that have vulnerability to damage types for it to really be that big a game changer. And when 5th edition was first being playtested, back when it was did a D&D Next, they actually did have a lot of creatures that had vulnerabilities, and they found out that it was just far too difficult to balance the game if everything had vulnerabilities. It just, resistances changed the game less than vulnerabilities did. Vulnerabilities completely broke the game. So they took out most of them. There's still some creatures that have vulnerabilities, and it's nice when you find that, because you feel really powerful and you feel really knowledgeable when you find a creature that has a vulnerability to a certain type of damage. That being said, linking the kind of fire and ice thing to spells that do fire damage and spells that do cold damage would be a recipe for disaster. So we couldn't do that. However, and I'm going to real quick, I'm going to see if they actually have terms here that I could use. Where's your job gauge stuff? Job gauge. I know you have the job gauge here. Roll actions. Yeah, I know. Job gauge. Elemental gauge. Astral Fire, Umbral Ice. Okay, so they already kind of have something else we could do. And yeah, this is how it actually works. Casting fire spells grants Astral Fire, which increases the power of fire spells in exchange for increasing their magic point cost. So they get more powerful, but they cost more. Casting ice spells grants Umbral Ice, which decreases the mana cost of ice spells and greatly increases the speed in which mana is recovered. So that's how you regain stuff. Is you cast more ice spells, they actually cost less mana than you regain. So that's how it works. So if you were to group, we change up the Black Mage. Go ahead and give them the spell casting, the spell points from the Dungeon Master's Guide. Again, I think it's interesting. And it'll help the class to play a little bit different. So just literally take the variant spell points from the Dungeon Master's Guide and give them to this class. It'll make it feel more unique. And then, for their spell list, they have 2 spell lists. They have Astral Fire spells and Umbral Ice spells. And however you want to divide the spells, that's going to be the most difficult aspect of building this class, is choosing which ones count as fire spells or which one count as ice spells. You might even be able to go as far as whenever... actually, I think I like this one even better. It may be broken. This is something that needs to be tested. But whenever you learn a spell, you choose whether you learn it as an Astral Fire spell or an Umbral Ice spell. And doing that will you write it in your spell book and you put either fire or ice next to it. Whenever you cast a Astral Fire spell, you get 1 astral point. Whenever you cast an Umbral Ice spell, you get 1 Umbral Ice point. And then the defining feature of the class would be, hey, here's a list of the things that you can use your Astral Fire points or your Umbral Ice spells. None of which will be to get you more spell slots. Again, we need to keep this under control. And you can even have cantrips could give you cantrips could be split in there as well. And the limiting factor is you can get multiple up to 3 of each of the Astral Fire or Umbral Ice points. However, cantrips can only ever get you up to 1. In order to get 2 or 3, you need to cast actual spells. And again, dealing with the balance of that will be something that you have to deal with. And casting an ice spell would get rid of all your fire spells or something. Again, all of this would need to be stuff that would be play tested, and I don't have the time or the energy to do that. But that's kind of my idea. So you would have this kind of list of things that you can use your things. It might be, I would probably paint it in the kind of realm of Battlemaster maneuvers or Eldritch. I think it'd be more like Eldritch invocations, where you go, here's your list of things that you can use. We'll come up with a nifty name for them. Let's see if there's a name. Oh, Umbral Hearts, Polyglot, Aspect, Paradox Gauge. We can call them paradoxes. These are your paradoxes. You use your astral fire or umbral ice points to cast them, and basically each paradox would have an effect when you use an astral fire point, an effect when you use an umbral ice point. So it's like this paradox would have this effect if you use that, and then as you get to higher levels, you can learn ones that cost 2, or cast or have the ability to use multiples, and they have a middle effect for some of the higher level ones. Who knows? Again, there's a lot of potential in it, but it's something that would require a full redesign. So again, this is not something that I'm saying, hey, definitely do this. I'm saying the Black Mage as it's written right now, completely broken. There's no way to fix this. Giving them both spellcasting and both Venetian spellcasting and magic points is not okay. It'll never be okay. There's no way to make those systems work together. If you want them to have magic points, give them magic points. If you want them to do spellcasting like every other class in the entire game, use the Venetian magic system that has always existed in the Dungeons and Dragons. But you don't get to give them both. So that being said, going to the subclasses, the Makai. Each one of the subclasses gives you an expanded spell list. One thing I do have to mention is this is an expanded spell list. This is not extra spells that you know. It just means you can learn these spells. You don't have to. So that is something that is a little bit different. That being said, for the Makai, it's basically just damaging spells. Chromatic Orb, Witch Bolt, Agonizar's Scorcher, Snillock's Snowball Swarm, Cone of Cold, Immolation. They're just fire and ice spells. At second level, you get Unstable Aether, which lets you use mana points to reroll damage to damage dice that roll a 1 or to 2. So basically, great weapon fighting that uses some of your mana points. Is it more beneficial to spend a mana point to reroll something that rolled a 1 or a 2, or is it more beneficial to cast a first level spell? It's always more beneficial to cast a first level spell. A first level spell will always give you more damage than rerolling 1s and 2s. Always, always, always. So Unstable Aether is kind of useless. Polyglot. You can read all writing. Technically, there's a second level spell that allows you to do this, but it requires you to cast spells. Off the top of my head, the only other thing I'm aware of that gives you this ability is like a 14th or 15th level monk ability. So I'm not a fan of Polyglot. For its the fact that it's a 6th level ability that you just automatically, effectively, you get the the constant effect of a 2nd level magic spell. At 6th level, not cool. Need something different. Ethereal Manipulation. Your movement is no longer restricted when making use of your Ley Lines feature. So you know how it used to be that you had to use your movement in order to cast your spells? That was one of the limiting factors. By 10th level, it doesn't matter if you're a Makai. So, yep. And then additionally, you can burn a spell point as a bonus action to teleport back to the place that you cast your first spell when you did Ley Lines. This is something that was, I believe it was a Shadowbringers feature. It's either Shadowbringers or Stormblood. They gave this ability for wizards to move out of their Ley Lines and then teleport back, so that they weren't quite as married to their Ley Lines when they were doing mechanics and things like that. So that's what that's from. Again, is it more beneficial for you to be able to cast a first level spell? Or be able to use that for half a second level spell or a third of a third level spell, or to go back to where you were? Nope, it's always going to be more beneficial to cast a spell than to do that. So, nope. Especially now that you can move with your Ley Lines, yeah, no reason whatsoever to ever use that. Then at 14th level, you get Devastating Force. When you roll damage for a spell and roll the highest number possible on any of the dice, choose one of those dice, roll it again, and add that roll to the damage. You can use this feature a number of times. You can do intelligence modifier. It's 5 times. You regain any expended uses when you finish a long rest. I mentioned this before. That feature is a feature in some other RPGs, and it's called exploding dice. Basically, if you roll the max amount of dice, it explodes, where you get to keep that number, and then you roll it again and add it. I like exploding dice. Open Legend is built around exploding dice, and it's massively fun. It's the system that I use for my Zelda RPG I run every other Saturday. So it's super, 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 super duper fun. Only exploding one die at 14th level is pointless. For the largest die, which I don't believe wizards almost ever get to roll a d12 for any of their spells. I think d10s are where they max out. If off the top of your head you can remember a spell that uses d12s, put it in the comments down below. I'm sure there are. I just can't think of it. If you rolled maximum on Devastating Force at 14th level, an additional 12 damage for a spell, it's not that useful. Really isn't. And most of your spells are going to be using d6s and d8s, are the most common. So an extra 6 points of damage at 14th level isn't useful almost ever. So this is massively underwhelming. So that's the Makai. As a theme, it casts fire and ice spells, and it's supposed to be damage focused, and it doesn't do any of those things well. The Enchanter. The Enchanter is fun because there aren't a ton of quote-unquote buff spells in D&D 5th edition, mostly because buffing, as you would think of it in Final Fantasy, the same spells would require concentration, which means you could only have one buff ever active at any point in time. So the Enchanter is effectively a buffing subclass, which is kind of hard to pull off in 5th edition. So their expended spell list are all buff spells. Bless, Cause Fear, Enlarge, Reduce, Magic Weapon, Slow, Haste, Blight, Charm Monster, Dominate Person, Hold Monster. Makes perfect sense. Second level, you get Point of Influence. You are able to use your Ley Lines for both enchantment and evocation spells. So now you can do even more broken spellcasting. Silvered Tongue. You gain proficiency in something with uses charisma, and if you already have proficiency, you gain expertise in it. I don't really have a huge problem with that. I don't understand why it is a part of this class. Again, this is a single attribute dependent class. It only uses intelligence. Wizards have never been known for their eloquence and speech. So I have no idea where this came from or why. Is it a bad ability? No, it's just I don't understand why. 10th level, you get Unshaken Will. When you must make a wisdom saving throw, you may spend 1 mana point to gain advantage on the saving throw. Again, the choice you're going to have is it more useful to get advantage on a single wisdom saving throw, which doesn't happen very often, or cast a first level spell, which Fairy Fire is a first level spell and gives your entire team advantage on all attack rolls against up to 4 targets. Advantage on a single saving throw or advantage on all attack rolls against up to 4 monsters for as long as the spell lasts. Yeah, it's always going to be it's always going to be casting the spell, so that's pointless. 14th level, Deep Influence. When you cast an enchantment spell, you may spend 1 mana point to cause the target to have disadvantage on their saving throw. Again, is it more valuable to get disadvantage on a single spell? This one, if you really need them to fail. But again, mechanically, from a statistical standpoint, disadvantage is basically giving them a minus 3.5 to their roll. And advantage is giving a plus 3.55. So is adding or subtracting 3.5 more valuable than a first level spell or parts of a second level spell? No, it isn't. So none of the things in the subclasses have justified using mana points to do anything other than double the number of spells you can cast. They just don't exist here. So, yeah. Finally, we have Void Mage. Void Mage, I like the flavor of it. But basically, it's just a warlock it's a wizard. It's a necromancy wizard. Effectively, it's a necromancy wizard. Specifically, it specializes in doing necrotic damage and evil spells. So a lot of spells that have weird names, like the expanded spell list: Armor of Agathis, which is a super fun spell, by the way. Arms of Hadar, Ray of Enfeeblement, Shadowblade, Hunger of Hadar, Summon Lesser Demon, Banishment, Summon Great Demon. I hate Banishment. I will do an entire video one day on how Banishment is a really boring spell, and one tiny change turns it into a super interesting spell. And then 5th edition is Contact Other Plane Ritual and Negative Energy Flood. Basically, you do necrotic damage. Void Casting. At second level, when you cast a spell, you may spend 1 mana point to change the damage type of the spell to necrotic. When you change the damage type of your spell in this way, it does additional damage equal to your intelligence ability modifier. This bonus applies to your spell once. So 5 extra damage and you turn it to necrotic. Is 5 damage and turning it to necrotic good enough, more useful than a first level spell? No! Moving on. Void Sense. You can burn a mana point to give your dark vision up to 60 feet for an hour, or increase your dark vision by 60 feet. And you gain advantage on perception checks that use your eyes while this thing is active. Is dark vision for an hour more useful than a first level spell? No. A second level spell called Dark Vision gives it to you for 8 hours and is not concentration. So doing 2 gives you better dark vision for 8 times as long. Not worth it. At 11th level, which I think is supposed to be 10th level, I think that's just a typo. Necrotic damage you deal is unaffected by resistances. It's a bonus action. You may spend a mana point to overcome necrotic damage immunity for your next spell. Again, resistances happen often, or somewhat. Immunity is limited, but in certain situations, that could be useful. Is it useful enough to do, instead of being able to cast a first level spell or being able to cast half a second level spell? No, just cast a spell that uses a different damage type. You got plenty of them. You are a wizard. You've got damage of every single type imaginable, and you have a spell book. You can learn every single spell in the game, or almost every single spell in the Giga game. You're never going to have an issue when you have a spell book. It's just completely worthless. Bloody Veil at 14th level. When you kill a creature with a spell of first level or higher with necrotic damage, you gain temporary hit points equal to the spell's level multiplied by your intelligence ability modifier. So multiplied by 5. Is that useful? Actually, it could be. If you kill a creature with a fourth level spell, that's 20 temporary hit points. That's a decent chunk. If you kill them with higher level spell slots, that's even better. So that one's actually not bad. I think it's kind of dumb that it ties it to necrotic damage. I think the only reason it does that is to try and get you to use void casting, because otherwise there's no reason to ever use void casting. And there's enough really powerful spells that do necrotic damage that you'll never need to use it. So Bloody Veil is actually kind of interesting. It's just marred by the fact that it is in a subclass that is just pointless. So, final thoughts. Overall, the Black Mage doesn't work. The magic point system breaks the class instantly from level 1. There's no other way to do that. You cannot give them two different ways to cast the same spells. It just doesn't work. If you want to use a spell point system, there exists a spell point system in D&D 5th edition. Again, it is on page 288 and 289 in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Look it up, read it. It's a really well-designed system. It really is. It's kind of interesting. It tells you how many... You start off with 4 spell points. By the time you get to 20th level, you have 133 spell points. So it's not... it's not like you get 1 spell point. No, it actually does create some interesting things. And then it tells you how much each spell slot level... So... First level spells cost 2 magic points. 6th level spells cost 9 magic points. And there's rules and limitations. Like, it's a really well-designed system. You want to use spell points? Go for it. The system already exists. You don't need to reinvent it. The system they have in here already works really well. And it gels well with the other spellcasters. So you can have a class that uses spell points that exists with classes that use the Venetian magic system without either one feeling overpowered or underpowered. That's the big issue when you introduce a new way to cast the spells is if it exists with other spellcasters, you have the risk of one of them is going to feel more or less powerful unless you do some major balancing, which is what they did before they published the DMG. So read the section in there and use that system if you want to. I think it's an interesting system. I think it would be a fun class. Especially with how the Black Mage, since, again, Final Fantasy IV, where Rydia was your Black Mage, and then I think Tello was technically a Black Mage, and then I can never remember which one, Palomar Porum was a Black Mage, but that was a Black Mage. You had like 47 different characters that basically acted like Black Mages. Yeah, they've all used spell points since Final Fantasy IV. So I think it would make perfect sense to use that. And then lead into the Astral Fire Umbral Ice system. It could be really, really interesting. Again, my idea is when you learn spells, you write them in your book as either fire spells or ice spells. It doesn't mean they do that. It means they gain you fire points or ice points. Then you can use those points on things that we're going to call paradoxes because it's already a word that's associated with the things. And those paradoxes are going to be very similar to Eldritch Invocations, where you have a big old list of them, and certain ones are going to be locked behind certain subclasses, and certain ones are going to be locked behind levels, and things like that. And that's how it should work. And that'll turn into a really, really interesting, fun class. And it will give you so many different things that you can use to balance the class. That's the big issue with this, is it's so massively unbalanced that every other spellcaster will feel inferior to a Black Mage. And that's not fun in a tabletop RPG. It's not fun in anything where someone can come in and do what you do, but everything they do is better. It's not fun. You feel like you are a side character in your own story, and it's not a fun thing. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. Like I said, there's 2 more subclasses. I've kind of glanced through both of them. The reason I picked back Black Mage was because I could get the whole thing done in one long video. And this has been kind of long. It's an hour-long video. But let's be honest. Most of my base class videos are about this length because I don't know how to shut up. I don't know which one I'm going to do next. In the comments down below, let me know if you want me to do White Mage or Samurai next. Rifle Avenger has already told me there is a typo in the Samurai. I will take that into account when I'm doing it. He mentioned the typo in a comment on the Reddit, the subreddit. So I'm just going to when I read the class, I'm just going to assume what he says the typo is supposed to be is what it is in the actual document. I'm just going to replace it because that if it's already aware that it's a problem and they've already come up with a way to fix it, why in the world would I treat it like it's a problem just because it's printed there? Yeah, people make mistakes. You know, we found a typo in this one. It's not that big a deal. It's a typo. So yeah. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right. Bye-bye.